Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. For The Wire, my guest today believes that the origin of the present crisis in Manipur goes back to a British insistence to determine and distinguish between the valley and the hills and not regard them as a central interconnected single topographical entity. The British insisted on seeing the valley and the hills as two separate topographical entities. Joining me now to explain his thinking further is a professor at the School of Social Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Bimol Akoijam. Professor Akoijam, in a recent article you wrote for The Hindu, you say that the hill-valley divide in Manipur is a contrived reality, is based upon a false topographical perspective. Rather than view and treat the valley and the hills as one interconnected topographical entity, the British insisted on seeing them as separate entities. Before we go further, can you explain this point? Because it lies at the very center of how you view the situation in Manipur.
Yeah, I think it is, that's a typical approach that we do in social sciences. And in simple terms, if you are engaging with the present, then it sometimes necessitates you to go back a little bit to see what are the factors behind it. So we are only focusing on here and now sort of situation. So we need to look back, and I think it still plays out what they have done long time back. The story can go back, because we don't understand what is the actual situations in the state, which is including for the, inhabitants of that state itself. The story you can understand how the, this continental formation stories, how Himalayas came into being and how this Indo-Gangetic plain, the extension of which is the Brahmaputra Valley. It's a collision between this Indian plate and the Eurasia plate, and how that elevated is the Himalayan mountainous region, of which Manipur, Nagaland and Mizoram are part of the same, all the way to Andaman and Nicobar Island and Arakan ranges and all of that. And the depression that was created through that collision, later on it was filled in with the sediments and so on. It became a very fertile plain. So this topographically, these things are two different things. And people who sort of evolve in this ecological system have a very different kind of a relationship. So if you say, for example, when Assam, take for example, when the British took over, the Naga Hills was part of the Assam, which is a mountainous region, which is around about 1,500 roughly meters, and Brahmaputra Valley is barely 50 meters. But Manipur, if you see, is part of that hilly region. So people started looking at it, the relationship between Banaras and Uttarakhand is the same as Imphal and Churanchandpur.
And it's clearly not.
Which is not. Or in closer home in northeast, the relationship between Brahmaputra Valley, Guwahati and Kohima or Aizawl is the same as looking at Imphal or Churanchandpur or Ukhrul, which is a false way of looking at it.
Absolutely. This is the point you make in that Hindu article. The British believed or thought that the relationship between the Imphal Valley and the hills like Churachandpur would be the same as the relationship between Guwahati and the Naga Hills, but it's not.
It's not.
And a simple fact cited by you in your article illustrates the absurdity of the British position. The Imphal Valley stands at 790 meters. Churachandpur, which is supposed to be in the hills, is 922 meters. Yeah. There's a difference of 132 meters, which is nothing. And yet, the two are regarded by the British as completely different topographical entities that are not interconnected. And as I read that, I said to myself, this is a bit like claiming that the ground floor and the top floor of the Empire State Building are two different entities. They're clearly not. And similarly, the relationship between the Imphal Valley and Churachandpur is interconnected and close. They're not separate entities.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you give this example. I often tell that the highest building in India is around about 320 meters. It's supposedly in Mumbai. I mean, the difference is, as you pointed out, 100. But more crucially, if you look at the Google map today, you have access to it. Churachandpur is actually a part of that oval-shaped middle valley. There are a lot of valleys in Manipur, by the way. We always have a singular notion of a valley, oval shape. There are, say, Khopum Valley, there are Sajik Tampak, there are a lot of valleys because it's a mountainous regions, So I think if you have rightly pointed out, it is part of an organic entity. It's an intimately connected part.
And the British made the terrible mistake
Yeah.
of trying to separate an organic entity into two separate topographical entities.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Now, as a result of
By the way, it's not only topographical, but the people themselves have been separated by them.
Absolutely. Now, I'm coming to that.
Yeah, okay.
As a result of this false topographical distinction, you write in your Hindu article, the people were divided and governed under different regimes of law. The hill tribes were governed by a separate set of criminal and civil laws, irrespective of whether they lived in the hills or the valleys.
Absolutely.
And this means that on the basis of a completely false, contrived topographical division, the same people began to be treated in different ways.
Absolutely. That's, if you look at the rules or the administration rule that they introduced in 1907 till the last one, I think it is in 1935, you clearly see in the provisions in that how to run their state. So if what they call it hillsmen or hill tribes, if you have a hill tribe in Manipur, then who else are there on the valley? It could be another tribe which can, in their mind, it's like the Pain tribe for Assam and hill tribes for Nagas and Lusai. Similar kind of a perspective is what they are trying to impose.
But it didn't apply to Manipur.
No, they are imposing that kind of a perspective.
Absolutely, they were imposing it, it doesn't apply.
Yeah, which doesn't work, but they said hill tribes. So obviously the framework they use for Assam has been applied here, that kind of so they have created through these different ways of governing people, what, can be called two different sets of subjects of the colonial time.
And as you said, they imposed on Manipur a pattern that applied in Assam, but was not applicable to Manipur.
Absolutely that.
But by imposing it on Manipur, they ended up dividing the same people with the same ethno-linguistic traditions into two different people.
Yeah.
It's a false division they created.
See, if you look at it in linguistic classifications, the most advanced Kuki-Chin or Tibeto-Burmese family of language is Meitei-Lon. This is the same linguistic family, Kuki-Chin and other. If you look at the linguistic study, you can see they come from the same linguistic family, and ethnically speaking also they belong to the similar kind of things.
Now the problem is that what the British began after independence and after the merger of Manipur with the rest of the country, the Indians not only continued, but the Indian government in fact took further. Yeah. You write, and I'm quoting you, the colonial category of hill tribes has been re-rendered as scheduled tribes, and the rest as general category. And then you add, this was accentuated by introducing a division of land through legislation such as the Manipur Land Revenue and Land Reforms Act, as well as Article 371C of the Indian Constitution. And this means that what the British did was anyway bad enough, it was false and fabricated. But after independence, that fabrication was taken further by the Indian government.
Yeah. Call it, as many of the scholars in South Asia says, there is a continuity between the colonial and post-colonial period. So in sense, it's a continuity, but it has exaggerated the situation.
And this interesting thing to note is that the exaggeration of the situation which happened after independence is all based on the false topographical distinction between hill and valley, which doesn't apply to Manipur.
Karan, what is sad is that we talk about post-colonial period is unpacking of the colonial categories and so on. Instead, it has more farmer because the British did not. Even though they have this perspective of the topography, in terms of their practice, it is applied on the people, not on the land. You can move around and you settle down in the colonial period, right? But Indian law has introduced in terms of the land as well. They have this idea of hill areas, this concept.
You're making a very important point, and forgive me, I'm interrupting you only to underline it for the audience. In the British period, although the distinction between hill people and valley people was based on a false topographical definition and perspective, there was no distinction in terms of land.
But only on people.
People could buy land wherever they wanted.
They can settle anywhere.
But after independence,
yes,
that distinction in terms of people also began to apply in terms of land, and suddenly the Maite, the people of the valley, couldn't buy land in the hills.
Yeah, that's
right. Although the hill people can still buy it in the valley.
That's a constitutional scheme.
Absolutely. So this is what I mean. What was already bad and false under the British became worse and further fabricated after independence. And this is why you mentioned the Manipur Land Revenue and Land Reforms Act of 1960. Because that's where this distinction in terms of who can own where comes into being.
You know, say for example, even the Planning Commission from the, around it, I think it is a fifth five-year plan onwards, have been using this category in India called state with hill areas and hill state. There's a distinction, hill state and state with hill areas. From mid-60s onwards, there's a committee which has identified this, 1965 if I remember correctly. So Manipur is a hill state. So in the hill state, you are defining hill areas. That's absurd at that level. You can do hill areas in a state with hill areas. That makes sense. State with hill areas like Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Assam, you can talk about identifying hill areas.
But if the whole state is a hill state,
and you're still saying that hill areas, that's what Article 371.
Absolutely. And this absurdity could be looked at the other way around. Manipur is defined as a hill state.
Yeah,
but you want to treat the valleys as different.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the crazy things, that's been going on.
Let's take stock of what we've so far established, because I think it will help the audience do that. What you said, starting from the British and continuing under the Indian government after independence, step by step, a false topographical division ended up creating different people out of the same people, giving them different laws, and worst of all, giving them different land rights.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true, isn't it?
That's true. That's true.
You have a very telling sentence about precisely this in that Hindu article. I'm going to read it out for the audience because it actually brings home the absurdity of what happened. You write, nowhere in the country, perhaps even in the entire world, have such abnormal and fabricated divisions been officially created and nurtured amongst a minuscule population belonging to the same ethno-linguistic family inhabiting a small and compact mountainous region. This is actually a unique absurdity.
Yeah, absolutely. See, that's the false. If you look at Article 244(1), and which is normally derived from the fifth schedule, you are supposed to have tribal advisory councils. In Assam, it was excluded. Assam has a separate one. For example, in 67, they have a tribal welfare advisory council. This is an advisory body. But in Manipur, the absurdity is that you create a mini assembly within the state assembly.
This is the hills
area.
council.
No, hill area committee. Hill area. Now the same false, false category. Hill area committee within the state. So it's you can call it as an assembly within a assembly, and ironically call a hill area committee in a hill state.
Absolutely. This is the second
And mind you, Karan, what is dangerous is, unlike the other advisory tribal or hill area advisory councils, which is envisaged in Article 244(1), this body has a legislative power. They can stop from legislating something related to the so-called hill areas.
As you said, and I'm underlining it for the audience, once you've defined the whole of Manipur as a hill state,
which is what the Planning Commission did.
And therefore, it's contradictory to create within a hill state a hill area committee specifically for hill areas, because the whole state is a hill state.
And that too, empowering them with far more power than the advisory council envisaged in 244.
So this absurdity that we're discussing is now littered with what look like contradictions. Creating a hill area committee for a hill state, but the hill area committee only applies to the hills. Whereas the whole state is a hill state.
Absolutely.
So it's meaningless.
That's a meaningless one.
Now, as time went by, two further things happened. First, because of this false topographical division and the different laws that then got applied, people began to think of themselves as different and separate. You write in your Hindu article, it affected the ways people imagine their social existence and how they fit with others.
Absolutely.
And the net result was that people who were originally ethno-linguistically the same ended up not looking on each other as brothers and sisters, but as rivals and opponents.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how, in fact, you should know that the beginning was also, the British were quite conscious of what the capacity of this state called Manipur. You had, they have been looking for an ally to fight the Burmese. And you can see there's a report about why they choose Manipur. They said, these are, funnily, they also call it, these are the Rajput of the East. And they have an enmity with the Burmese, and they have the well-organized, is a civilized, wild tribes around, and it's that kind of imagery they have. So they have already chosen. Once they've defeated Manipur in 1891, and Burma a few years before that, they have already taken over in 1885, 86. So Manipur loses its strategic significance. That's why the war was 1891 war. What they did is that once they take over, they disbanded the military, Manipur army, and this division between hill tribes and the valley people
Was a way of dividing and ruling.
Yes. They had documents on that. They suspect that they didn't trust the Manipuri king, saying that they will, incite rebellion in the hills.
But you're saying something that is very revealing. A tactic used by the British to divide and rule, right?
Yes.
Not only led to creating different people, different laws, different land rights out of the same people.
Absolutely.
But worse still, that tactic of divide and rule was taken further by the Indian government.
Yes.
And the Indian government was no longer a colonial government, it was an Indian independent government. So at independence, we should have actually rethought what the British had done and reversed what they'd done, rather than taking it forward and building on it. That is the logic of your argument, isn't it?
See, that's why, ironically, if you have just said something, this tactical, strategic decisions too. But this is also augmented by their anthropological sense of how they look at people in the third world countries, the British.
The British. But all of this can be explained from the British point of view. It becomes inexplicable when an Indian government, after independence, builds and takes it further.
Karan, that's what I said. Forget Manipur for a while. Every scholar knows that there is a continuity between the colonial practices and post-colonial. Our IPCs or Indian Police Act, everything is borrowed from the British.
Absolutely, but let's stick to Manipur because
I'm saying it's the context. That's the context.
But the point I'm making is that what could be explicable, maybe not forgivable, but explicable from a British point of view, because they were colonial masters, they would want to divide and rule to maintain their authority. It becomes inexplicable, if not unforgivable, under an independent government, because we as an independent country should not be dividing and ruling. We should not be exacerbating the divisions that were falsely created. We should be uniting and reversing what the British did. But we took it forward.
Thank you, Karan. You must be one of those person who is saying this. But the truth of the matter is that many of these division has something to do with the counterinsurgency strategy of the Indian state as well. I mean, let's keep that thing in mind.
And this tied in with that. It furthered it. Now, I said two things happened. One was that if you treat people differently, they start looking at themselves as different.
Yes,
and people who were brothers and sisters now become rivals and opponents. But a second thing happened as well as time went by. Democratic politics exacerbated the situation further. You're right, and I'm quoting you, that the dynamics of competitive politics, of electoral democracy, have further sharpened the divide.
Yes. I'll give you an example. This whole notion of, the hill areas have been deprived of development and so on, this has been deeply communalized. If you stand and train economists and try to look at it, you know that this backward region has to do with, say, topographical factors. There are demographic factors. Say, if you have a village of less than 200 people, how do you expect them to connect through road? Because the top-down policy doesn't fit on the ground. And then you have, mind you, since the Naga insurgencies in the 50s onwards, the rugged hill terrains of Manipur is been a theater of that conflict. When you have a law and order situation as serious as that, which required the Indian army to be deployed, how do you expect development as such? Besides that, you have what is known among the economists called the neo-patrimonial structure, people cutting percentage and this elite usurping. These factors have never been flagged off. Instead of, you said, Meiteis have deprived, the valley have deprived.
But let me put it even more simply. It's the same point
I'm sorry, I wanted to give a classic example. This idea of deprivations and we are primitive. By the way, this has also been now required to be changed by a committee headed by the Tribal Welfare Secretary, In 2014, there was a committee. They want to remove this primitive.
But what's the point you're making?
That's why I'm saying primitive categories should be thrown out. So they started saying we are primitive, we are backward, and these advanced people have been usurping everything. Every time when the election is around, they will flag top.
Absolutely. Let me make the point simply. Let me make the point simply. It's the same point. Because I don't want the audience to get confused in detail. They don't understand.
No, I just want to give a concrete example. Just give me one line. This MLA will flag off about the lack of funding in the tribal areas in the budget and so on, just before the election. But they will never raise this when this thing is discussed in the assembly, when the budget was discussed.
And that's the point I'm making. Once competitive democratic politics began to become traditional and accepted and customary in India, what it means is that politicians appeal to what matters to their constituency.
Absolutely.
And that means you start appealing to your constituency in terms that differentiate people rather than unite them. So if you have already distinguished between hill and valley, then MLAs in the hill areas will be distinguishing the hill characteristics and therefore defining the hill people as separate to the valley. And the valley will do the opposite in the other direction. As a result, this is why you say democratic politics and the way people appeal and the promises politicians make exacerbated the divide.
Absolutely right. You're bang on target.
And your conclusion is that this is the root cause of the problem we're seeing once again occurring in Manipur today. You write, these mobilizations have produced the genocidal violence that Manipur has seen. Take it back to the British and plot the history thereafter, step by step by step, whether under the British or an Indian independent government. We've been manufacturing a divide, nurturing the divide, and making people look upon each other as if they are different to each other, but they're not. They're all the same.
Yeah, that's why they're trying to create a Lebanon out of Manipur. Some of these even tribal scholars talking about confessional state, consociation model, which is applied in Belgium, without realizing the historicity of or specificity of the local situation. Kuki Naga class, that infamous one, is also, that they're trying to clean certain tribe from the territory they claim. In this latest one, is happening the same thing. In Champur, for example, none of the Meiteis families are there. The ground has been raised, And
I think the opposite applies in the valley.
In fact, the other way around. It's an urban area, so it's difficult. There are still Kuki settlement, well protected, house is still intact. And I can tell you that once they normalize, people will come back.
Okay. Let's at this point look at what your argument, which we've discussed in considerable detail, and we've plotted it from British times right up till today. Let's look at what your argument suggests about the situation today. First, the land laws in Manipur are based upon a false topographical division into hill and valley, and therefore, presumably, those land laws which don't allow the Meitei to buy in the hill areas should be scrapped because they're based upon a false topographical distinction.
Well, I would put it this way. There is an urgent need for land reforms in Manipur. So because of this dichotomy, we should be careful one thing here.
But would that land reform, which you think is urgently needed, do away with the restriction on the Meitei buying in the hill areas?
No, but I think you are narrowing down because that's what I'm saying. That's a part of the thing, but there's a larger picture. You know how the land honor system is. You will be shocked. Already you are shocked with this metaphor of the building you gave. Imagine Delhi as a space, only the CP area is inhabited and the South Delhi is inhabited. Rest are caste land, so to speak. If you're a Kuki, you can move out of your house and start another village anywhere because these lands have not been mapped out. It's not a revenue one. You understand what I'm saying? Is that you can move out and occupy lands like this, inhabited like that. So and this kind of thing is hampering themselves because there is no collateral for bank loan. There are tribal scholars, women writing that they don't have a right of ownership. So within the society themselves, forget about Meiteis for a while. You require a drastic land reforms there. It's just the chief is owning the entire village.
I understand the point you're making, but in the present situation, what will be remarked upon when people watch this interview is that although you're talking about wider land reforms, embedded in that is the critical point you're saying, which flows out of the logic of your argument, that the land laws that do not permit the Meitei to buy land in the hills should be scrapped. That will, I think, upset the Kuki when they hear it, but you're saying it is a logical conclusion of the argument you presented.
Yeah, this is what I am saying. Land reforms is required. That will be part of the story only.
Absolutely. But again, but I'm saying the Kukis
because
listening to this will pick up on the fact that you're saying the Meitei should be allowed to buy in the hills because, as you put it, before independence, the Meitei could buy all over. There was no distinction before independence in terms of land. There was only distinction and division in terms of people. That distinction in terms of land happened with the Manipur land laws of 1960. Now you're saying it should be scrapped.
No, Karan, I think you are still talking in a binary sense of scrapping. And I'm saying it that it is absurd to have this 90% not utilized for economic development of the people, and then individuals don't own land in their tribal areas. They can't take loans because there is no collateral. So it hampers economic development. There is a land ownership issues. But Meiteis is not going to buy lands everywhere, mind you. They will not move. Because the tendency in a mountainous region is to come down rather than climb up.
I take the point you're making, that there will be an awful lot in the wider land reforms that would benefit the Kukis because they'll be able to take loans, they'll be able to offer collateral on the basis of which they can get loans.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that will happen
is
that the restriction on Meiteis buying in the hills will be done away with.
I've already said it's part of the entire scheme.
Absolutely. And that restriction is based upon a false fabricated topographical division, which is an untrue division.
Yeah.
A second conclusion that flows from your argument is presumably this. The Meitei claim to scheduled tribe status actually has no credible basis other than a desire to be on the same footing as the Kuki and the Nagas.
When you say desire footing, I suspect you mean to say buying land. Far more than that, I think it's not right. I think, if you really...
It's not right. You think the demand for scheduled tribe status is not right?
It's not driven by that primarily. I'll tell you what is that. I have been studying this. What are the factors that drive this? This is unjustly, they have been boxed into this tiny piece of land where everybody settles, everybody can get access to. Now you have the railway being open, transnational railway, globalization. They are pretty scared of even losing this small piece of land. They think that by converting themselves into a scheduled tribe, this area could also be scheduled because that's the scheme that the government of India does.
I take your point.
And the second one is
there's
also one more factor that drives.
Come to that. I'm just pointing this out for the audience before we go to the second point. I won't stop you making the second point. What you said is that what is of primary concern to the Meiteis is the land problem.
Yeah, it's not so much of buying land in the hills.
Sort out the land problem. The demand for a scheduled tribe status will then fall by the side because the only reason the scheduled tribe status demand has been brought up is to settle the land problem. Settle the land problem, they may not insist on scheduled tribe status thereafter.
Yeah, if it is, the population can be then shared and then entire collective
population or land? Land can be shared.
No. I'm saying that there is the second point that I was trying to tell you is also the second factor which I've seen. I've analyzed their campaign materials and so on. There's a desire to have this sense of we are one. So if, why should we define ourselves as separate and some as primitive? We are one. We have come out together like this. So, this, among some Meiteis, you have this sense of being a caste factors and we are hierarchically higher kind of thing. So these group of people who are demanding scheduled tribe wants to do away with this mindset as well, to be with the tribal people as one.
I understand. One of the consequences of the demand for scheduled tribe status is that the Meitei then presumably cannot enjoy OBC status and scheduled caste status because some percentage of Meiteis get OBC rights and a very small percentage, minuscule in fact, get scheduled caste. That will have to disappear because you can't have all three.
Obviously.
But you made a very important point. The central concern, and this flows out of the logic of your argument, is the land concern. The Meitei want a right to be able to buy land all over the state as they could under the British before the Manipur land laws of 1960 came into being. And once that is granted, the demand for scheduled tribe status will lose its priority. It will fall into the background. It won't be so important.
Karan, you are hammering on that point. I'm just trying to say
only because it's an issue of concern today.
No. That's what I think. Your question is still flowing from the false sense of that dichotomy. What I'm saying is that scheduled tribe demand is primarily driven by the fear of losing even this tiny space valley. If it is not scheduled, outsiders will overwhelm Meiteis. We will not be nowhere. Tribe will have already been protected. That's a feeling. It's not so much against the tribe. It's not so much about wanting to buy land there, to protect this valley. Second, I said that among many Meiteis, they feel bad about this distinction between a hierarchical sense of a relationship so they want to do away with that. So you can see the campaign material and this desire, you can see that we are one. Why should we think ourselves as superior or they are inferior? Everybody is claiming to be primitive trait to define themselves as a tribe, a category which the government of India's committee has said that it should be removed now. It's pejorative, but people are fighting in Manipur that I am more primitive than you are and you are more primitive.
So if I understand you correctly, in addition to the land issue, something else that drives the Meitei is the desire to be seen as one, to be seen as equal, to be seen as the same family.
Yeah, to be one with them.
To be one with them.
Yeah, that has been going on for...
When you say one with them, that's one with the Kuki, one with another.
The tribal population, the so-called tribal population.
Remove the differentiations and distinctions.
Yeah,
we are one.
Yeah, right? Linguistically, culturally, there are so many shared spaces.
Then
and
there's
why don't we groom that one?
that also flows from the logic of your argument. This is a claim made to me by Pramod Singh, the head of the Meitei Lipon, in an interview earlier this week itself. He said that the Kuki are not indigenous to Manipur. He said the Kuki are outsiders. Your argument, which we've discussed at length, makes it clear that the Kuki are very much indigenous to Manipur. They are not outsiders. They are all part of the same ethno-linguistic family. The British, and sadly thereafter the Indians continued it, are the ones who divided them as a result of creating a false topographical distinction.
See, I think when you use the word indigenous, I have an issue with that one. Because
he used the word.
No, I'm saying everybody is saying indigenous. You can see the Kuki has an indigenous tribal forum, indigenous. Where it comes from, we all know. It is a particular vocabulary which even India, China rejects.
But why do you have a problem with the word indigenous?
That is what I'm saying. The government of India has a problem with that. Chinese government have a problem with that when it comes up.
What Pramod Singh meant is that the Kukis are not people who were originally from Manipur. They've come from outside Manipur, outside India. Your logic would say he's wrong.
No. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not neither saying he's wrong or right. I'm just trying that the way you have framed the issue as indigenous is deeply problematic, and that's why I'm reminding you that either India and Chinese and many other countries have problem with this because it tends to distinguish a sharper distinction between whom you consider as native and the other.
Yeah, except that it wasn't me. I'm using his language.
I'm saying it. Everybody is using it. Everybody, not only Pramod, everybody uses it.
The point that Pramod was making when he used the word indigenous was to stress that the Kuki are not originally of Manipur. They've come from outside Manipur. He claimed from outside India. That's why he called them outsiders.
See, that's what I said.
The logic of your argument...
Bear me out. Just hear me out. I'll just explain what I'm saying is that why I have a problem with this term. I've already explained it.
But forget the term. Are the Kukis
because
outsiders?
then we should not be using this term then. You asked it.
I
would rather use it as a citizen. Let's talk in terms of a citizen.
I only use the term because he used it. Let's leave it aside. The point he was making is, are the Kukis outsiders? Your argument clearly says they're not.
That's what I'm trying to tell you, that you are jumping, the conclusion, what I'm trying to say. There's a nuanced way of looking at it. First of all, this notion of how long you have to be in a place to be called a native is a fundamental problem in term when you use like indigenous. But I prefer to use citizens. Okay? So in that sense, Kukis are citizens. Not all Kukis are foreigners. I'm very clear on this one. But when you talk about the migration patterns, it's quite clear that some of these group, you come under the category of Kuki. These are recent relatively as compared to the other one. But by saying that recent, if they have been there for 100 years or, 200 years, how can you call them as an outsider? Would be my argument in terms of a citizenship. But mind you that I think one of the things, I've seen many of your program also, a lot of writings have been going on. Who are Kukis? I'll tell you one example. Thadau Inpi, this is the apex body of the largest tribe in Manipur, which comes under the generic sense of Kuki. They have applied memoranda after memoranda to the government of India as well as the state government, saying that do away with this term called Kuki, remove any Kuki as a category from the scheduled tribe list because it will encourage infiltration from the outside. It is not said by Meiteis, it is said by Thadau Inpi, the apex body of this.
Let me put something else.
You understand this?
I do, but let me put something else to you. It was very clear in the first half of this interview that you believe that the people of the hill and the valley are the same ethno-linguistic group
Absolutely.
of people. We repeatedly said they are the same people which the British for reasons of divide and rule,
Yeah.
created a false topographical distinction and converted into different people.
Yeah.
If that is the case, and you stand by it,
I stand by that.
If that is the case, then the Kuki and the Meitei are the same people. They are the same ethno-linguistic
That's why
people.
that has a larger part. What I'm saying is that how, if you look at the history, the British have utilized these Kukis as a buffer between the Nagas and the valley areas. That history is, I don't need to repeat, it's everywhere, you can check it. What I'm arguing is that you stick to this argument of indigenous, non-indigenous will have some issues in the contemporary time. You need to treat people in terms of citizens. Major issue for me today is that how did this citizenship get acquired in the recent histories? There are satellite images. There are so many other issues of the settlement patterns which needs to be investigated. That's a very clear picture. But I do not like to call my own fellow citizens as outsiders.
That's why you disagree with. That's why you disagree with Pramod Singh.
Yeah, but if he's calling all the Kukis or all the people
He
who
went
comes
on
under,
record to me to say that the majority of Kukis are illegal.
That's an issue which needs to be investigated.
Do you think it's possible that the majority are illegal?
Yeah, I have enough information on the satellite images. That's a security area reasons people have been mapping out because Indian Army has been fighting and they've thrown out many
But
of them.
aren't you now contradicting?
No,
what
I'm
you
not
said?
contradicting you. That's why I think your framing is when you have an illegal immigration issue in Mizoram, the same Kukichin group, there is a famous icon which was born in Kukichin state of Burma, which is now in Mizoram. He get an Aadhaar card, he has a birth certificate from Mizoram. The Mijos are up in arms now. How do you have these refugees become citizens? In Manipur, you can't raise these issues.
Let's come back to Manipur.
So what I'm saying, they don't get mixed up.
Let me finish. If we agree, and we've said this 3-4 times, that the Kuki and the Meitei are the same ethno-linguistic group.
That's true.
Then,
Said to the Mijos
then on what basis do you think we need to investigate that the majority of Kuki are illegal?
No, I don't say that majority.
But you said that.
No, I didn't. Don't put words to my mouth.
But you said it needs to be
I am
investigated.
saying I'm saying that that's an allegation that needs to be investigated.
But is it true or false?
How can I say without a proper investigation?
Then it means it could be true.
It could also be true. It could also be wrong. But this not taking an investigation is creating a conflictual situation. It's like, that Cuban crisis. You don't talk, you think something, I think, without talking to each
But
other.
explain something to me. If they are the same ethno-linguistic people, if they were falsely divided by the British and that division was made worse after independence by the way land laws were created, then why do we even need to believe for a moment they're illegal?
Come on, Karan. Will you allow all the Bangladeshis as Bengali to come here, all the West, Punjabis from Pakistan to come in, all the Sinds to come in, all the Tamils from the Tamil Ilams to come in? Why should they be illegal immigrants?
On what basis do you believe?
Tell me, if they come in.
If someone makes an accusation that the majority of Kuki are illegal and someone else says, yes, we must investigate it, you only investigate something which could be plausibly correct or false.
And that's what I said.
What's the reason? It's an
I have already given.
Be defended.
No. How can it?
If
somebody accusing that a lot of Bangladeshis are here, for example.
That's a BJP accusation.
I know. That's
it's usually made against Muslims because they don't like Muslims.
I know that. I don't like that.
But does the same thing apply to saying that let's investigate whether the Kukis are legal or illegal?
If you have a security space on a border area, Indian Army has been satellite mapping, and if you have images of a growth of villages and mushrooming of villages, it is legitimate. Though some of the people in Churanchampur have rightly pointed out, hinted at one possible angle to that is, after the Kuki Naga clash, many of the Kukis have shifted from the rest of the state to that area. So the increase in the villages could be because of that, not necessarily from outside India.
Let me say something.
No. Did you get what I'm saying?
I did indeed.
Let's investigate. That's fine. Well, but I don't like to continually point fingers at all Kukis, all citizens who come. But I've already said, Kuki is a problematic term. Who is a Kuki? Ask the Thado Inpi who have said that they are not Kukis. You made that point.
Let me say something. There is a contradiction, I think, between saying I don't like to point fingers at all Kukis, which you said, and at the same time saying that we need to investigate whether an allegation that the majority are legal is true or false. Because the two don't sound to me to be the same position.
No.
Let me finish, and you realize why I'm saying it. When the BJP says that Delhi or Bengal is full of illegal Bangladeshis, it's said without any evidence or any basis.
Yes.
Right? I'm asking you, what's the basis on which you think we need to investigate that the majority of Kuki could be illegal? What's the facts that prove it?
See, first of all, there is a porous border.
So?
People are coming in, which is there in Mizoram in their own record. If they have 40,000 refugees.
Those are from Burma because they are fleeing from the junta.
Yeah,
and
that's what I said.
2020, right?
No, before that, before the 1980s.
Similar has happened in Manipur. The number of Burmese refugees sheltering in Manipur is probably 3,000 or 4,000 at most.
I think it will be presumptuous, Karan, if you hold back. If we have an institutional mechanisms to deal with these refugee questions on the border state, which Mizoram is doing it, why we don't do it in Manipur? You tell me this first.
Because the infiltration from Burma into Manipur is probably just a couple of thousand. That was said
that
to be
is
by
your
Mr.
assumption.
Haukip.
That's a presumption.
It was said to be by Mr. Haukip, who's a BJP
You
MLA.
believe that because they have interest. And I will say that if you have, for example, if I really tell you that the dynamics between the Nagas and Kuki, we started this whole problem. Calling the Kukis, within quote, Kukis as the foreigners is not Meitei's language. It was started by the Nagas. You
but
don't
it's been
forget
taken
that.
over by the Meitei, promoting
No. I'm saying it that the point is, the MLAs in the state assemblies, that now it is 10 to 10. It used to be 12 Nagas and 8 Kukis. Now it is 10 into 10, and some of these people will tell you that in the future it will be 8 Nagas and 12 Cookies.
Well, we don't know.
No, that kind of thing is.
Let's not speculate. We don't know. That wouldn't be fair.
So I'm saying it that Karan, my only, if don't take me, misread me. I'm saying it that you have an assumption that it could be only a few thousands. So because Mr. Haukip says, I said, he thinks that some people think that it is could be in thousands and thousands. These are two opinions. What makes you believe Haukip more than the other allegations? You tell me that now. What makes you believe him and take it on the face value?
Because usually these allegations are made on the assumption that you don't like cookies, you want to prove they're illegal, you want to throw them out, not like, which is why it's which is the basis on which the BJP makes claims that the majority of people or a large number of people in Bengal. What the two sound very similar.
No. I'm absolutely, see, I'm very clear on this. The right-wing politics, playing games with the communal issues is something that one has to be very conscious of it. But at the same time, I am very surprised that you tend to take on face value what Mr. Haukip says, but the other allegation you dismiss it. What makes you do it? Simply because you don't like a right-wing politics?
No.
Or possible association with
that?
No, let's call it that.
I take Mr. Haukip at face value because he's a BJP MLA and his party is the first to claim that people
they have already
illegal.
Proclaimed there is no party affiliation is more important. But as for hatred, I'll also tell you on this, which is what, when you look from here, you may not know it. Hatred and mistrust for the Meiteis had not been manufactured today. It has been manufactured among the tribals by their politicians, by intellectuals, which we have already discussed things for decades.
Okay.
And Meiteis have only started in the recent time.
Well, let's not.
And still, I can say that I can.
What is beginning to sound like Kuki versus Meitei.
No, that's why I think you are
becoming very much like that in the last 10 minutes. Let's not descend into that. That wasn't my intention. Let me clarify.
Let me say this word, then let's accept this. Just as we handle illegal immigration issues in Mizoram, please do certain institutional mechanisms. Don't give in to these rumors of one or the other, which increase the conflict.
Let me make a point which I think is important, because I think the audience will be certainly wondering what has happened to this interview. I did the interview because when I read your article, I believed that you were coming up with an explanation for what has happened in Manipur and is happening that actually is rooted in the British creating a false topographical distinction. And you said very clearly, as a result, they had divided the same ethno-linguistic people. And over a process of time, they had made those people not only divided, but look upon each other not as brothers and sisters, but as opponents and rivals. And democratic politics had exacerbated that. All of that led me to believe that the logic of your argument would lead to the conclusion that the Kuki are as much a part of Manipur as the Meitei or the Naga. The claim that they're outsiders or not indigenous made by Pramod Singh would be wrong. But when we brought that conclusion to the forefront, we've begun to differ dramatically.
No. Why is that? Because that's why I said I prefer the word citizens.
Leave the word. I was only using indigenous because it was Pramod Singh's word.
Karan, please just bear me out. If we want to solve, I don't want to aggravate the situation. What I am saying is this: if we look as a citizen, simply because we are culturally similar doesn't mean that we do away with the idea of citizens and non-citizen. The Bengalis are the same, Punjabis are the same, Tamils are the same. We don't encourage everybody as citizen, right? In that sense, if there is an issue, there's an unsettled situation in Burma, and there's close affinity not only with these people, with us also, in the Kuki-Chin group, with a linguistic family, that if we take care of them, it's fine. But without having a proper constitutional or official institutional mechanism, throwing mud at each other as foreigners, as insider, as indigenous is ridiculous. I'm saying it that please, just as the Mizoram is doing, please establish some institutional mechanism. Government India is refusing to do that. Okay. And it aggravates the conflictual situation. Why you should not deal with these refugee questions properly?
So now in addition to the steps you said that would help sort out the problem, which is a major land reform, right, which would be a very essential first step, you also believe a second essential first step is some mechanism to determine whether groups of people, I'm deliberately not using Kuki, Maite, Naga, but groups of people are legal or illegal.
The refugee is a problem. There's a crisis in Burma. Why don't we as a neighbor take care of some of them in institutional mechanism? What's wrong? Why do you communalize and put in a conflictual binary position? There is an issue of non-citizens. If it is appeared, you don't have to treat them like insects. I'm using it deliberately. Some people look at, when you started using is kire makore kind of a attitude, which is very dehumanizing, and it's a particular kind of an ideological position.
You're talking about the termites.
Yeah, I don't like that. So what I'm saying is simply saying that please take an institutional mechanism to deal with this.
But you're saying that one further step, in addition to a massive land reform which we've discussed, one further step that will help resolve the crisis in Manipur is a determination in some constitutional way of who is legal and who's illegal.
And more than that, also to treat a humanitarian concern to deal with these refugees influx in the northeast. Mizoram is doing it, but central government don't approve it. They have taken it. I wish that central government takes a very
and the reason you believe that a constitutional determination of who's legal and who's illegal is necessary is because you don't accept at face value the claim that there are just a few thousand refugees from Burma that have come to Manipur. You think the allegation that there may be many more, the allegation that perhaps the majority of Kukis are illegal needs to be investigated.
Yeah.
One last thing.
To see, because the settlement pattern, that's what I said. It is available satellite images. You can check.
Yeah, you made that point. One last point. How is this argument about the origin of the crisis in Manipur viewed by the people of Manipur themselves, by the Maite, the Nagas and the Kuki? Have you discussed it with them? Do you have any sense of how they look upon this argument?
See, I think, because it's for decades you have done this, mistrust has been manufactured. And so prejudice has been a part of the game. Same thing happens, that this violence is driven by that prejudices. Once a prejudice is there as a latent force, any spark will create that one. Now, that's how we are doing it. But there's a larger game plan of the state, which I don't like it also. But how would they look at, I would give you this way, Karan. There's a saying, which you must be familiar with, the difference between a prejudiced person and an ignorant person. Ignorant people can be changed with facts and figures. Prejudice will resist. And so I can expect that some people will resist.
Prejudice is the barrier in Manipur.
But anybody who has an iota of capacity to think for the well-being of the common good and everything, how this conflict is harmful for the people in that. Rest of India is watching. Prime Minister is watching. Everybody is watching. We are dying there among ourselves. Then once you realize what is this, then you realize how this fall, and we should have a common ground to find a common good and deal with our differences.
You mentioned the government and you said the Prime Minister is watching. It's what, 20 days since your article was published in the Hindu? Have you had any response from the government of India? Have they got in touch with you to talk about what you've written?
That's the saddest part. It hurts, Karan. The Prime Minister went to Orissa on the 3rd June to check the crash victims. 3rd May, incidentally, 1 month before, they started. Not a single word. It hurts. I have been here in this Delhi for almost like 40 years, nearing now. And I have seen what is India, what is the notion of exclusion, the otherness of the India's northeast. It reminded me, it's not my student days. Even as a faculty, I've served for almost 30 years in 3 institutes, premier institute in this country. It makes me think there is a resistance to change. On the 75th year of this independence, we are talking about inclusions of Northeast into the history textbook. And then this happening, had this happened in Bihar or somewhere, the media, the parliamentarians, the rest of the country will not watch as there. And I'll tell you one more thing, my colleague and friend Yogendra Yadav once wrote this, using me as a trop in one of his essays in 2001. He said, you are looking as if it is their problem, we have to solve it. You see that kind of an attitude. So his silence is deeply troublesome.
The Prime Minister's silence.
And it really hurts.
It's not just that he hasn't visited, he hasn't said a word for 5 or 6 weeks.
It really hurts. I'm not angry. It really hurts.
Does it also show that he's actually indifferent or unconcerned?
When I said hurt, do you need to elaborate why I get hurt?
Because of the indifference and the lack of concern.
Many more. And in fact, he is also an epitome of the larger fault line between the rest of the country in the Northeast. That's what I think. Like including the reporters that this mainstream has been doing it, jumping into certain conclusion. It's very easy to fall into that, savior and solidarity with the marginalized, the idea of the tribe and so on.
Can you explain that point? Because I think it's interesting. The Prime Minister is the epitome of the larger fault line between the Northeast and the rest of the country. Can you explain that quickly?
That's what I'm saying, Ed. You're still 75th year of Indian independence. You are talking about inclusion of the history of the Northeast into the national textbook. You're talking still over 75 years. And now that this happened in Manipur, how many of you have a sleepless night here? People like me get affected, though I'm here. Many people, I'm sure that many of these children and students are very agitated. Their fathers, mothers, household has been killed, relatives have been killed. I can see that anger among these tribal students. I can see among the Meiteis as well.
But you can't see it in the Prime Minister of India.
Yeah, not only him, I'm saying that rest of the country, if you're worried that you would have been crying instead of, I'm sorry to say this.
The rest of the country treats Manipur and the Northeast
and including the media reporters. You would have been far more sensitive not to play games to the blame game. If you want to douse the flame, you will not try to be a savior of the tribal and then succumb to a particular position. You will not be a savior of the Meiteis as a Hindu and then try to fuel the conflict. So the progressive elements within code is taking the position of tribal savior and then some people as savior of the Hindu Meiteis, and you in the mainstream is fueling this through these press reporters and others. You're not even careful about not naming people. So happy to name Meitei Arambai, Meitei this, but when it comes to many of the reporters, I told one of the Indian Express person, you don't even identify which insurgent, you only say militants and others. I don't want you to identify them. I don't want them to identify. You're playing games to that instead of helping. And this is a national problem. Manipur is part of this country. One should be helping. Instead of that, you are fueling this conflict through the reporters and others. And give me a chance. You do a reporter's analysis, content analysis of all the major newspapers. How many articles have been published by the Meiteis? How many has been published by the Kuki scholars and so on? And what kind of perspective these reporters and papers, editorials have taken it. Please look into it. You will find how you are not helping the conflict.
You're making a very important point, and I'll end with that. That the feeling that you have, and I imagine it's reflective of practically everyone in Manipur, is that at a time when we need help, the government has turned its back on us, the media is not understanding, they're inflaming, and Manipur and the Northeast are being treated as if they're not part of India.
I mean, including you look at that, talk about this Article 355. I'm amazed that you have so much constitutional expert. It's a dicey game being played.
Can I explain what you mean about Article 355? Because we discussed it on the phone and then you answer it.
Yeah.
There is confusion about whether Article 355 actually is being applied in Manipur or not. Papers like the Deccan Herald and the Hindu have claimed that it is applicable and it is applying. But Kuldeep Singh, who's the head of security or the advisor on security, has insisted it's not applying. The problem is, Kuldeep Singh has also been appointed head of the Unified Command, a job that should be actually the job of the Chief Minister. That suggests to many people that without officially declaring that 355 has applied, it's being applied unofficially and indirectly. Is that a reflection of the confusion in the government, or is it a reflection of the federal principle being not just diluted but eroded?
I think I would go by that last assessment of yours. See, my reading of Article 355 is is a moral and legal obligation on the union government to take charge of the law and order without dismissing the government. The government of the state can run education, health, and economy, and so on and so forth. But in matters of law and order, this article obliges the union government to take over without dismissing the government in total. In other words, what is essential in the state list, law and order, has been temporarily shifted to the union list under this article. This is by the way, Article 355 was also the basis for justifying Armed Forces Special Power Act as a legitimate legislation by the union government in Supreme Court judgment in 1997. So what's happening here is, if you want to invoke Article 355, my reading is that it must be done in the name of the president, to take charge of the law and order, the police, and so on and so forth. Now, what I saw in some of these appointments is done in the name of the governor, which would assume that it is acting on the advice of the council of minister. So it is illegal in that sense to do that.
And in fact, it's absurd, because if it's happening on the advice of the council of ministers, then Biren Singh is advising the governor, remove me as head of the unified command and place someone else,
so which is bizarre. This is a legal fallacy, a de facto practice which hampers the federal structure. Mind you, today it may be Manipur, it can be anywhere in the country.
It's a much bigger problem than
yes,
Manipur.
Absolutely.
Because this could be the thin end of the wedge that cuts through many other states.
Absolutely, it can come in the federal structures. People are saying remove Biren. I think I don't know whether I should say it. I get a feeling that it almost amounts to. He's like the government of Manipur is like a proxy government in that sense. To me, it sounds like
a facade. It's a facade.
It's a facade. So it makes no sense whether he remove or not. Everything is in the command. But you know what?
But
there could be one camp. No, not only federal. It also helps the conflict, because the Biren can still be there in the eyes of many people as the enemy. If he is removed, that game is gone. So sustain him and act by center, erode the federal structures. So I get a feeling that it is part of the forces that is aggravating this conflict.
Okay. That's a very important point, and in a sense, when you say that the media has not done justice in the reportage, this is one element of what the media should have picked up and investigated and did not do so.
Yeah, that should have been done. Don't fall prey to Biren's existence as a chief minister without having any power is a crucial thing to continue the conflict.
My last question, given how complicated the situation has become, even though the origins are very simple, but over the decades, it's become very complicated. And now emotions are involved.
Yeah.
And now, in addition, there is the allegation that there is a large or a small number of illegals who are there as well, and we need to find out. Do you see Manipur being resolved reasonably quickly? I'm not even saying quickly, reasonably quickly. Are you really worried this could get worse and worse?
No, I'm very positive, because politics is a dynamic process, so you don't give up easily. We can imagine there are ways to handle, rather than this false dichotomies, there could be ways in which a collective good can be envisaged, such as instead of doing this autonomy and so on, why don't you create a second chamber in the assembly with the equal representation of all the district, which is incidentally within Court Hill areas is 10 and Valley will be minority there. Create it and handle it, issues on development and forest affairs. You can have a second house and certain legislative bodies can be instituted, not on the basis of ethnic groups, but in terms of the areas. You see, right now we have 16 districts, of which 6 are in the valley. This is Central Valley, and the rest is in that. So if you have an equal, these people will be the majority in that house. And if this kind of autonomy, this actually consolidate.
When you say autonomy, you're talking about the demand for separate
state, or this will consolidate the identity, which is a false categories, Hyphenated uses cookie, mar, chin, you change 4-5 usages.
We're running out of time. I can see the cameraman indicating to me that we probably got only a minute or two battery left. I want to thank you for having brought to people's attention something that I think most people had not realized, probably were not even aware of, that the origin of the problem goes back, in fact, to something that the British falsely but deliberately created, and which, sadly, unthinkingly, the Indian government not only accepted but took forward. The problem is that over the decades, it's become very complicated and emotional.
and now there are also allegations of illegal being involved. Unraveling it will be difficult, but you think it can be done, and one way to do it is to create a second chamber to the Manipur Assembly, where, as you've explained, the Hill people could be a majority, and that would help give them a sense that they're also being involved better.
Yeah, rather than consolidating the identities, which is parochial and exclusivist agendas.
Professor Joykam, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure, Karan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.